On our last episode of Just Lawful, you heard the first half of the interview with the mother of Jack Hanley, Julie Kelbin. It was raw, emotional, and gave us an insight into the pain and frustration this lady has endured since the night her son died. At the end of that episode, we took this story right up to the point where Julie met my Just Lawful co-host Sean Fuster, and they first crossed paths in the courtroom. As we conclude this interview, we again get more insights into the person Julie Kelbin, the impact all of this has had on her and Sean, and the complexity of our legal system, and how it treats those it is supposed to represent and provide justice for. So again, please join me, Daniel Panozzo, on this next episode of Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
But Julie, my first memory of you is walking into the court and seeing you sitting on the far side of the court, right behind where the journalists sit. And for me, it started with a nod. I didn't realise who you were. It was just a very sad, upset-looking lady. So I just sort of said hello as I sat down every time. And it just came from that.
There was many reporters in that process of the trial. You're the only person I connected with because it's one of them moments you meet someone in life.
Yeah.
Some people you're just meant to meet. And through the trial of that process, I remember sitting through watching that video of Jack dying in court over 100 times. We were there for each other.
We were.
Because it was a hard process, not just for me as Jack's mum, but everybody in the court to sit and watch that awful, awful footage.
I remember turning around to check on you after the first couple of times, and then I remember probably around time number 50 feeling your hand on my shoulder to check on me.
Because it's not an easy process to have to sit through.
No.
And
far harder for you than I.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it was awful for me, and we've talked about that already.
Yeah.
It was crushing for me, but for you, I can't even fathom. I've seen so many people in court stand up and leave when that sort of evidence is played. Of course they do. You sat there and watched it all. You stayed rooted to that spot.
I had to represent Jack.
Yeah.
There was nowhere else I would be in the world because my son had deserved representation, and that's what me and his siblings did. I couldn't leave the court. I had to sit there.
How did you feel in that moment if you had to put it into words? That unending, interminable limbo again and again.
You just keep watching, thinking, maybe I'm going to say something different. Maybe something will explain something. I keep using the word, it's just crushing. Absolutely crushing to watch over and over again. Not just to watch it over and over again, but to watch it be played in slow motion, frame by frame by frame. Was very hard. It was very hard, and it's something it will never leave my brain. It will never leave my head. And to this day, I'm grateful because that footage came from a beautiful young man who was visiting Adelaide and happened to be doing a Snapchat story, and very fortunate for us, which really not in the end because it didn't help us, but thank goodness he did come forward with that footage. So thank you, Andrew.
You know, I've got some notes here and some things I really want to ask, and one of them was about that video process. I'm not going to because you've already elaborated on that, and I can't imagine how hard that process was for either of you in that sense. One of the other questions I was going to ask, and maybe that's part of, we've touched on it, I wanted to know from you, what was the hardest part of going through that trial? If there was one, I don't know, maybe there was 3, 4, 5 things that were the hardest things, but what's the hardest part for yourself, Julie, having to navigate that trial process?
And we're talking about the trial, not the verdict here.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Sitting through watching that video of Jack hitting the ground and hearing statements from witnesses that said they could hear Jack's head hit the ground. That was the hardest part. Other hard parts was seeing the person responsible for throwing that punch sitting there. I've never once said my son was an innocent angel.
Yeah.
Broke me as well. No accountability. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great insight. For me, I hear this story and I immediately think watching that video must have been one of the most torturous things you've ever had to go through. I didn't even have the concept to think. Of course, the other aspect of that is you don't have, as we've said, we don't have the opportunity to talk about the character of your son in this courtroom. I hadn't even considered that. That must have been so difficult to sit through that process of having to deal with that.
And there was one point in the trial where that came into play, and I remember you being very, very upset about this when Justice Bampton started asking about one of Jack's tattoos.
You just took it right out of my mouth, Sean. I actually just wanted to say another horrific part was the offender is allowed to have referees saying what character this boy had. The person who is in the ground and dead is not allowed to have a character witness. And yet, the judge was commenting on an autopsy report of my son. And my son had 2 swear words on his chest that his brother had done. It was a family joke. Jack never wore no shirt in front of people. And a comment from the judge that was said, the type of boy that has swear words like this tattooed on his chest isn't likely to be home reading a book on a Saturday night. That one statement crushed me because Jack was more than likely to be home on a Saturday night. Maybe not reading a book because he would have been playing the PlayStation, which what young one isn't?
Yeah.
So that crushed me, that she judged. It felt to me like she was judging the character of my son by words written on him in ink.
Yeah.
And it felt like, well, that's not a nice boy because he had a swear word tattooed on him.
As someone you've seen, Julie, I have a fair amount of ink myself. And look, I'm sure I've been characterised and generalised many times over for it.
It's happened when we've gone out.
Of course it has. You know, nothing like that really determines anyone's character.
Absolutely not.
I've seen just as many murderers
Yeah.
who have not a drop of ink on their skin
Sure.
as I've seen people with ink all over their skin who are law-abiding members of the citizenry.
Yeah.
Quite seriously.
Yeah.
Quite seriously.
It astounds me when you say that, Julie.
And to be fair to the prosecutor, Mark Norman, he fought that very hard when that statement came out. He was very forthright with the judge saying that shouldn't be part of your honest consideration.
Absolutely.
Whether it formed part, we'll never know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I became close with one of the detectives, James, who was on our case. And he was always in a full suit. A wonderful man who was very empathetic and tried his best.
Yeah.
And he had heaps of tattoos. So you can have law-abiding citizens who are doing a job that not many people would like to do.
Yeah.
Trying to help our communities who have got lots of tattoos.
Yeah.
So it's very generalised. It's a horrible statement. I have tattoos, but I'm also a kind, giving person.
Sure.
It shouldn't matter.
No, agreed. Totally agree. Julie, you, I'm going to ask you something now that it's even a little bit uncomfortable for me. I want to ask you if you can describe how you felt and what went through your mind in the moment that you realised that Reith Wasserston was going to walk free.
Disbelief, shock, anger, frustration of we've just sat through 3 weeks of trial for some judge to throw a verdict so easily that no one was accountable for taking Jack's life. It left me frustrated with the justice system, frustrated with the judges. There is so much needs to be looked at in our legal system. It breaks me. I'll never forget July 1st hearing that. Never ever forget hearing them words. I looked at my family and frowned and shook my head like, no. And I did stand up in court and say some not nice words to the judge out of frustration and anger. I don't regret that today. I don't want to see that judge today because, God forbid, what I would say to her.
I don't think you're alone there. I think whether you're a grieving parent or not, I think there's a large portion of our listening audience right now that would have jumped up and said something very similar and would probably feel exactly the same way to this day.
And I need to stress here, in that moment that you're describing, Julie, all you've heard are the words "not guilty." Everything. Remember when we talked about this, on the last episode, Daniel? I simply hit you with what the verdict was and said to you, "There's no explanation. There's a 65-page document that you've got to read if you want an explanation." Julie, that's your reaction in that moment. There's no understanding of why. It's just the shock of not guilty. By the way, go read the novel.
Yep. Absolutely. It's just, you've sat through 3 weeks of trial, you've had a couple of months to make a decision, and you've come back with, you can go home now. You're not naughty anymore. See you later. Have a nice life while Jack's on the ground. No problem. Thanks, Justice.
Can I ask you from a practical perspective? If Her Honour had come in and given a 10-minute, 5-minute, 2-minute, half-hour, a short explanation of what her verdict was, would that, obviously it wouldn't have helped your feeling about the decision, but do you think it would have helped the impact of that decision if there was more than just, I find the defendant not guilty, I publish my reasons?
Most definitely. Understanding. I had no understanding of that verdict. It was just like, I had to ask people, did she really just say he's going home? Is he not guilty? There's not enough understanding when you're sitting there and been through what you've gone through. No, they should have more of an explanation. They should have to sit down and give at least a 5-10 minute explanation on why they're given the verdict they are.
Because the way a judgment's written, the judgment has, for anybody that's not gone and looked at it online in the week between the episodes, it has a conclusion set of paragraphs, 4 or 5 paragraphs that summarise the whole thing. There are some judges out there that will read those conclusion paragraphs. In my opinion, it should always be done. But there's a ability to forget that there are flesh and blood human beings sitting there waiting for that explanation, not just that result. It's not just about marking the score box.
Yeah. Does definitely seem like a protocol situation of where we need to do, this is what we need to do to move this along, as opposed to this is what we need to do to provide some level of understanding, explanations and compassion, empathy to the circumstance at least.
It's about empathy. What do I always say? The world has too much E and not enough E. Too much entitlement, not enough empathy.
Absolutely.
The legal system is entitled to a clear, concise verdict. Absolutely. But let's show some empathy along the way and explain to people like Julie, like lots of other people who I've met over the years, what that actually means. I said it to you last week and I'll say it again to you, Julie. It shouldn't have fallen to me to explain this to you.
Yep.
I went and got that judgment from the court PR officer and then I sat you down and took you through it.
Yep.
That shouldn't be my job. You know, the prosecution eventually did it as well. Absolutely. Not knocking the prosecution there. But when Julie was grappling for answers, for understanding, it shouldn't be a journalist who's responsible for that. I'm grateful it was, don't get me wrong. You know, the fact that it was me with the connection that we'd forged, that I could explain that to you. And you could cry and you could wail and you could thump me on the shoulder and the things that you needed to do in that moment was good.
But you weren't getting the judges' wages, were you?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The judges should be made accountable to explain it to people who aren't in the legal system every day. it's not fair to have any families sitting there not understanding why that decision was made.
We wouldn't have a show, and I wouldn't have a show on Wednesdays with Pembo and Will if the courts gave plain speaking explanations for things.
Yep.
Because that's what I do. I interpret.
Yeah.
I take in the legalese and I turn it into common talk.
Yeah.
But in a moment like this, where we're talking about ultimate responsibility for the death of a human being, that shouldn't be the foray of the media.
Yeah. Agreed.
Jack's been gone for 3 years and 3 months. To this day, I still reach out to Sean Fuster to ask him questions that I do not understand, to do with the legalities and anything else to do with that. It shouldn't be up to a journalist to explain that to me, no. But thank you, Sean.
You're welcome. I'm glad I can. I wish I didn't have to, on so many levels. I wish, as weird as this is to say, I wish we'd never met in this way.
Me too.
You know?
Yeah.
And I wish that I didn't have to keep explaining things to you because somebody out there in the system who's actually paid to do it was capable of putting that across.
Yep.
You know, in that process of you having to then take that verdict and actually wade through that, be able to decipher that and then give that to Julie, there's some really key moments and pieces of that are written in there. And Julie, I want to ask you, there's a really key statement. I need to ask you, how do you feel about the key statement? And this is how it's written. The court had not proved beyond reasonable doubt Jack had not thrown the first punch.
I want to scream. I actually want to scream, oh my goodness, Jack has never thrown his first punch, any punch, in his whole life. Where's the proof?
And that's
the thing. There is none either way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
As you and I have talked about for years now.
And that is a real tenet of what Sean and I have discussed about this case, and it's a real tenet of exactly why we do this, because it's not about having proof to prove it happened. Apparently the prosecution didn't do enough to prove that it wasn't possible that it happened, which is, and I always say this to Sean, I'm the first listener. I'm the common person that needs this broken down into the most simplest form of understanding. It's almost, you're talking a double negative of prove to me something didn't happen so I know that it might not have. When I hear that, I struggle with that from my perspective. Julie, God, I can only try to imagine when you hear something like that, and when it's actually broken down, the verdicts happen, you then understand this is one of the key statements. How is that possible? I feel for you at that moment.
It goes back to your part in the trial. The offender was allowed to have character witnesses. Well, maybe if the person who was in the grave gone because of a one punch was allowed to have character witness, maybe they would understand more that Jack wasn't the type of person to have thrown a punch.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the evidence focuses on the night, the moment, the incident. But character was at play here. Personal choice was at play here. And we didn't hear anything about that. Something I've always said about this verdict is that, and this is going to be hard to explain, so everybody out there that's ready with a writ, just calm down, put your pens down. Removing for a moment any personal biases and certainly not accusing Justice Anne Bampton of anything, this was one of the legally cruelest verdicts I've ever seen, because it is so legally sharp and incisive. It takes an emotive situation involving two young men. It takes an emotive situation involving two families. It takes a moment of violence that has been seen 50, 100, 150 times, backwards, forwards, freeze frame, pause, and comes back with something that is the cruelest of cuts. This very, very legal point that's taken us to date in excess of 3 hours to actually explain and try to pull apart. That's cruel to anybody to have to deal with, because you and your family are, with the greatest of respect, common people.
Yep.
You're not lawyers. You're not legal academics. You're not even journalists that have done it for 20 years. And you're being asked to swallow this razor blade of a judgment, slicing up infinities, a quantum wedge of possibility. Well, maybe it was also this, therefore I can't give you a definitive answer. It's
crazy.
I can't reckon with that. To this day, I can't reckon with, of all the cases that I've covered, this is the one that cops the quantum razor blade.
Yeah.
It's just unkind. Without meaning to do so, without any deliberate ill will on the part of the justice system, it's unkind.
It goes to the very heart of what we talk about, from the most specific of legalities. This is a lawful, legal verdict. It's clearly one that everyone here feels is far from a just verdict.
Well, let's find out, Julie. Do you feel like your son got justice?
Absolutely not.
Do you feel like that verdict was a just verdict?
Absolutely not.
Do you understand it's a lawful one?
Yes.
How does that make you feel about the law? To know that the law and justice can sometimes feel like they're at odds to one another.
It sucks. Yeah. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. We need people in power need to look at these things. They really need to look at how it is delivered and it works today, because it's not working right.
Well, let's talk about people in power looking at things, because one point that Daniel has really seized on in our past conversations about this is there was no appeal. How did you feel when the DPP let you know that there was not going to be an appeal on this? They were going to let the judgment stand.
Very let down. Very let down. It made me feel Jack didn't matter. It didn't matter that he'd lost his life, his family had lost him, his friends have lost him. It didn't matter. It's okay, we'll just let it go. So I'm not a fan of Justice Bampton. I'm not a fan of the justice system at all.
And then to add insult to injury to that, to bring us back to part of where we started, how did it feel then for me to have to tell you down the phone that I couldn't do another story with you?
I cried because I knew you so wanted to do this, and I felt, wow, no, I didn't get a chance to read a victim impact statement, but I've got an angel on my shoulder trying to help me get it out there. And I know you felt just as let down as I did. So that was sad. That was very sad that wasn't allowed.
I thank you for never having held that against me.
Oh, never.
I really do.
Never.
There's a couple of points I just want to, I won't say backtrack, but there's a couple of points that both of you raised and spoke about there that I want to sort of touch on.
Yeah, we sort of rolled there, didn't we?
No, absolutely no. I certainly wasn't going to stop that. We talked about the idea of whether we reluctantly or not agree, yes, this seems to be lawful, it's certainly far from just. Julie, let me ask you, what would justice have looked like for Jack?
To have someone accountable for Jack not being here, for there to be some form of punishment for someone who has acted this way. After watching the video in court, it's quite clear who hit Jack. The judge knew who hit Jack. So at the end of the day, why isn't anybody held accountable for it? For someone then to live their own life and then go on and get in trouble again? No, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Do you think that this in any way, well, let me rephrase that. How do you think the outcome here in this verdict reflects on Jack and his life? If it does at all, how does this reflect upon Jack?
Wow. Personally, nothing can ever change how we feel about Jack, but in the law, I felt like Jack didn't matter.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter. That's how I felt. The legal system let my son down.
Yeah. A little bit earlier, and you mentioned, the man sitting to my left over here, Sean, is one of the beautiful, bright things that came out of this horrific situation. I want to take you back and ask you about a circumstance that I know after the verdict's been delivered and you come outside and you spoke to the media and you said, in some words similar to what we've spoken about today, there was a meeting and you had a really beautiful, coincidental, fortunate meeting with two young men who have gone through their own circumstances. And we know them as the Mars Brothers. I want to ask you what that meant to you in that moment of I can't imagine the emotional roller coaster, highs, lows, and everything in between you must have gone through in that last, let's just say, a couple of hours, as opposed to 3 weeks, as opposed to however long this process was. But I want to take you back to that moment where these two masked men come over and speak to you, and what that meant to you.
My heart was forever melted from that moment, that these two gentlemen had lived such horrific lives, were wearing masks to keep their identity a secret, then removed their masks and spoke to me with empathy towards me for what I've just suffered. And I felt very honoured that they cared enough to stop celebrating their win they'd had. And by the way, guys, I'm glad you've got a win, and I hope yous are okay. They cared enough to come over and speak to me and show me some empathy. I felt very blessed and beautiful to have met them men, and that they cared, which also made me want to reach out and grab them and hold them and say, I'm sorry that there was such horrible humans that you have to be here today. So yes, that's one of the beautiful little moments that did come out of all of this tragedy.
Yeah, I know that's a moment that Sean has relayed to me a number of times. While you're here, I'm sure he's already relayed this to you. I really want him to relay to the rest of our audience while you are here, and just tell me your perspective of that, Sean. What did that moment mean for you, and how did that affect you?
That was an incredible collision of two things that I was covering at the same time, two sets of people who I had grown so fond of and cared so deeply for. To see the boys show grace and love toward you when you needed it the most, but then in that instant, that hairpin turn of yours to become a mother again and go, oh, but you're two young boys who have been abused, so I need to look after you. It was this feedback loop of caring and empathy, and I've never seen anything like it. I thought I'd seen everything out the front of courthouses, and I've even seen a guy do a ninja run to try to evade a tax fraud case, and that's saying something. But to see that feedback loop of goodness, just pure goodness, and all my memories of that moment are quite literally tinged with a golden light. Like, I look back and I remember how the sun felt, how the breeze felt. It was this perfect moment of grace within horror. It was the triumph of what the brothers had been through, the tragedy of what you'd been through, mashing together in a way that meant all three of you could actually keep your heads above water for 5 more minutes.
Yep.
I'll never forget it, and as you and I have talked about, the fact that nobody took out a phone and took a photo.
That was amazing, an amazing moment, that the respect that was held then, no one took a photograph of them boys.
No.
Because they deserve their identity to be kept to themselves.
That's right. Nobody filmed it. The TV crews looked away. Everybody looked away. I got to admit, I didn't even think to take my phone out because I was lost in the moment. But just that it only exists in our minds and our hearts somehow makes it more impactful as a result.
Yep. I'll never forget the moment, ever. A beautiful moment.
I was grateful in that moment. I'm going to say this now. You had not 5 minutes before that told me again that you didn't want to be here anymore, that you just wanted to be with Jack. And I don't know if you remember, but you were sitting down in the gutter out the front of the court with your back against the poles.
I don't remember.
I didn't think you did. Your back against the poles, your feet in the gutter, curled up when the boys came over. And like I say, you were lifted. They literally pulled you back on your feet.
Brought tears to my eyes now because it was a moment. I don't remember sitting in that gutter. I was obviously just lost and depleted. And to have two strangers come up with such compassion was something I'll never forget. Bless you, boys.
Julie, I've got a couple of last questions for you. And the first one I want to ask you here is, if there's anything that can be taken from this horrific situation that you could offer as advice or to support anyone else who may have to face navigating this or a similar situation, is there anything that you could offer from your experience?
Take one day at a time. Don't have any expectations on yourself. Lean on your loved ones and your family. And please, please, anyone out and about from a night out, please just walk away. Don't get involved in the violence. If this message can save just one life, it's worth it. It's worth it. Please just walk away. Don't fight. Violence, nothing good comes from violence. And just all remember Jack was a beautiful boy.
I think your telling of his story and giving us the information in the background that we just didn't have on Jack has certainly proven that to us. Now, without souring this, and I really hope this isn't the case, there's something else I have to ask you before I let you go, and not to be too direct about this. How do you feel about Reese Watherston?
I consider myself a very peaceful person. I don't like the word hate because it's an awful thing to carry. Yet since losing my son, I've carried so much hatred and anger towards this one person that has never, ever showed me remorse, anger, sadness that he's still out there getting in trouble. One would think that you go through something like this and you're going through court for manslaughter and you walk away free. One would think you could turn your life around and have a nice life. You're very lucky. Hearing that I have trouble, I don't like to say his name. When I hear that name, it hurts my heart. My heart just I feel my chest crunching because I had no remorse from that boy. None. And that mattered. If that boy could have looked in my eyes with the slightest bit of empathy, would have mattered so much. But I never seen that.
Thank you, Julie. I know that was not easy, could not have been easy, so thank you.
No worries.
Julie, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you took me in, that you trusted me, that you've trusted me to tell Jack's story all this time, and that as we embark on this, that you were prepared to be part of this and eager in a sense, and you realised what we were trying to achieve here. Thank you for bringing Jack back here, bringing him with you today, and for being here yourself. And I can't tell you how much you mean to me. The bond that we've forged through this means so much to me. You're one of my favourite people in the world, and I'm so grateful to have you here. I love you so much. Thank you.
I always call you my favourite human, and I have a lot of love and respect for you, Sean, so thank you for honouring my son's life, for making me feel that Jack mattered. Thank you so much. Thanks, Daniel.
Julie, you are more than welcome to echo Sean's words. Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this process with you. Thank you for giving us the privilege to tell this story and allow you to have your opportunity to actually tell your side of this. It means a lot to Sean and myself to be able to use our position of privilege here to give you the opportunity. You know, as we all sit here, and Jackie's sitting here in the studio with us in that wonderful picture you brought in, he's looking over us. I have no doubt he's looking down, smiling, thanking you for remembering him and acting on his behalf the way you have. As a parent and as a mother and as an incredibly strong lady who's had to weather some horrible situations and circumstances. Again, I have so much admiration and respect for you, and my heart goes out to you. Thank you for being the woman you are and as strong as you are to have brought this story and allowed us to be part of that process with you.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Daniel, for being a part of this and for getting to know my Jack.
Absolutely.
And helping with Sean, both of you working together and getting this story out there. It's not just about telling you about Jack, it's about, please, walk away from violence.
Thank you so much, Julie. So there we have it. You've just heard the second part of the really, really difficult interview to listen to of Julie Kelbin there. As we come out of that, can't thank Julie enough, even though we have multiple times we did at the end of that. I want to throw to you right now, Sean, having the ability to go back and the privilege to go back and listen to that again, how are you feeling?
Angry. Really, really angry. Like white hot angry. Angrier than I expected to feel. One of the greatest jurists in this state, Dame Roma Mitchell, used to say, the best way to deal with a case is to treat it like a bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
You let the bathtub fill up with all the water.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the end of the case, you pull the plug out and you let it all drain away. That'll leave a soap scum ring, and you scrub that away in your leisure time and get rid of it as you can. The soap scum ring for me, after finally letting out everything we've talked about over these episodes, is anger. Because of what Julie's been through, that's the anger I'm feeling right now. You've all heard who she is, what she sounds like, what she's been through. This wonderful person. And she has been through hell. Unnecessary additional hell because she's been silenced for so long. It's one thing to lose someone you love so dearly, but to not be able to freely speak about it for all that time, and even now, what's the upgrade she got? Congratulations, Julie. Upgraded from silenced to censored for the rest of time. No matter where you go, what you do, if you want to speak publicly about your son, it's within these constraints. Even us. You know, we had to put constraints on her. I feel horrible about that. That's the antithesis of everything I'm about, and yet we had to do it because that's the law.
Look, to give context there, Sean, and for our listeners, what you're talking about there is we can only, and Julie can only, talk about this case in certain parameters. And let's face it, it goes back to what we originally said when we described this case as the death of Jack Hanley. We need to be incredibly delicate, as we've said a number of times, how we tread through this minefield. And we discuss this as the death of Jack Hanley because, as we know, there has been a death and a young man has died from a result of an incident. However, no one has been held legally responsible for that death.
And I want to stress, we respect the verdict of the court.
Absolutely.
We respect the acquittal of Reese Watherston. Regardless of our personal opinions of it, we respect it. And that's why we're doing this. The consequence, the ramification of that is that forevermore, there are certain things that can't be said, things that you can't say legally that you want to say in the heat of the moment, in the heat of emotion. Normal, ordinary human phrasings that we would use at a time like this.
Sean, you started that at the start of the last episode, the first half of that interview with Julie. You said straight up, Julie, I know there is something you want to say and you are not legally allowed to be able to say those words.
Yeah.
You started that whole concept off, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So when Sean talks about us putting constraints around this, it wasn't that, Julie, you can say this and won't say that and we'll censor this. Absolutely not. It was from a legality perspective of what is able to be said in the public arena.
And you all heard her voice break. You all heard her stop, her pause, her thinking about it every time. Imagine every time you want to talk about your son, you've got to go through that mental exercise of where's the line. You know, I can't freely express myself in this conversation. Where's the line? I must respect the law. And to be honest, the law has not respected Julie back. Think about what she said. When that verdict was handed down by Justice Anne Bampton, I didn't understand what had happened. I had to turn to other people and say, what does that mean? Is he going home? What just happened? We don't have a legal system that stops to explain things to victims of crime. And I want to point you all to something right now. Go look at the Courts in SA Twitter, at Courts in SA. Every couple of days, the court's PR team decides to tweet out this judgment, that sentencing, whatever. Those tweets are impenetrable. They may as well be nonsense. They are so thick and rife with legality and so lacking in common speech that Twitter thread is essentially useless. They may as well simply just put up the link. And we all know how impenetrable those judgments can be at times. We've talked about that at length as well. There used to be a great Chief Justice by the name of John Doyle. He went on radio. He took calls on Talkback once every couple of weeks and explained things to people. We used to have DPPs like Paul Rove who would actually stop and talk to the media and say, this is the reason this decision happened the way it did, or why I'm appealing or why I'm not appealing. We don't have people like that in the legal system anymore.
Sean, it amazes us, and we talked about it in the interview with Julie as well. She, like myself, I am the layman man. I am the common person on the street who is not going to understand a 65-page document explaining this verdict. As you said, and I'm not having a go at the process, so I guess in one sense I am. I understand for the economy of time and everything that's going on to be able to go, here is the verdict. You can find out all the reasons for my verdict in this document I've created down through.
I'm going to stop you right there about economy of time. I'm just going to pick you up on that for a minute. A judgment gets handed down in a manslaughter trial at 2:00, right? Court resumes at 2:15. So what are you doing for the other 14 minutes? You have a 15-minute window there before the courtroom needs to be used again where you can explain that judgment. In the coroner's court, they do it all the time. Mark Johns, the former state coroner, used to sit there and read the concluding paragraphs of his judgment.
Yeah.
District Court Judge Sid Tillmouth hands out a copy of his sentencing remarks when he's finished. There are judges and justices out there that do that. The High Court does it all the time. They publish a one-page summary on the front.
Yep.
I mean, a High Court judgment, if a High Court judgment was 65 pages long, it's a tiny High Court judgment.
Yeah.
These judgments are hundreds of pages long. They publish a full 1A4 page at the front that says, here's the guts of what this means.
Yeah.
In a South Australian court judgment, you're lucky if it's a couple of paragraphs on the front, which the court's media office says, do not quote this paragraph. It doesn't count for public consumption.
Okay, let me retract my previous statement and feelings about that, Sean. I get what you're saying. Look, I can only presume that it's for the economy of time and the protocol of what we have to do. I absolutely agree, and I think there is no shortage of need for those people who make this decision and make this verdict and judgment to actually take some time and effort to explain that as someone like myself would understand. It's great to have a document, whether it's 65 pages or it's a High Court document, which is volumes and volumes of whatever that might be. That is great for someone who has spent X number of years becoming a lawyer in the legal fraternity, whatever that might be, has done the reading, done the background educational piece to get that, to understand that. That's the language they speak, and I totally respect that in whatever industry you're in, not just the legal fraternity. However, for someone like myself, I absolutely agree. What would it take to spend 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes to give some relevance and reference to why I have this verdict? Yes, you can read it in that document. Let me give you some of the really high-level bullet points to give just the smallest amount of character framework around that for it. I totally agree with you. So in that sense, I could not agree with you more, and we certainly got that sense from Julie where she was baffled. What has happened? Why has this happened? What does this mean? And to this day, still refers to yourself. Sean, this has come up. What does this actually mean, Sean?
Exactly. Look, two things that Julie said in that interview would have made life easier for her. If Reese Watherston had shown some remorse toward her. Now, that's purely within Watherston's control, whether that does or doesn't happen. But the other thing was some explanation from the courts as to what was going on with that verdict. That is something that we can all talk about. That is something that we can all change. That is something that we as a society can say, you know what? Let's use that 15 minutes. You know what? A judgment takes 6 months to come back. Let's let it take 6.5 months if it means there can be some paragraphs on the front that explain this. Let's allot court time and allot court rostering in a more effective way so that we communicate to the community. Because that's the thing. The courts deal with the community every day. They are making quite literal life and death decisions about ordinary people's lives. So surely ordinary people should be able to understand that without someone like me sitting in the middle saying, give me 5 minutes to interpret this for you.
Sean, that is something that I know we will touch back on as we continue to cover cases. We are in the conclusion of the case of the death of Jack Hanley. It has been a ride, an absolute heck of a ride for those listening and for us as well, and having Julie in the studio. We couldn't thank her enough. I just want to, if we can, give a high-level summary of what we've kind of gone through just to wrap this all up. There's an incident on Hanley Street and a punch is thrown. A young man dies, loses his life as a result. Another man is charged with what we could consider the second worst offence possible, manslaughter. That same man is set free because of what a video didn't show us. And as a result, we have a grieving mother that still cannot speak her mind freely as she chooses. Is there anything else you want to talk to us about the case of the death of Jack Hanley?
I think you've summed it up absolutely perfectly there. Listeners, we have taken you on a trip through a case that continues to exercise my mind to this day. This is one of the thorniest questions. I think I called it a legal razor blade, one of the sharpest cuts that have ever been delivered in front of me in a courtroom. It's incredibly difficult to accept. It is legally right, but where it sits on your personal scale of justice, well, hopefully you'll tell us that. We'd love to hear from you. I know that it leaves me uncomfortable to this day, regardless of the fact it was right, regardless of the fact it was correct, regardless of the fact that it ticked all of the boxes, regardless of the fact that the judge in this handled it in a manner above reproach. It still sits uncomfortably with me and always will.
Sean, you could almost say that it's far from just, even though it is absolutely lawful.
That is definitely one conclusion you could come to out of this, and I'm sure many of our listeners are going to have their own thoughts on that.
I think they will.
And listeners, as we've said before, this has been a difficult case to cover. If you or anyone you know are experiencing any issues to do with what we've talked about, or any real issues relating to the sorts of things we've talked about, you can reach out to Beyond Blue on 1300 22 4636, to Lifeline on 131 114, or in South Australia during business hours, the Victim Support Service on 1800 842 846.
We have come to the end of our very first case, the death of Jack Hanley. We have got some unbelievable stuff coming up in our future cases and future episodes. As Sean said, we would love to hear your feedback about this whole summation of this case as we've covered it. You can, of course, catch us on Just Lawful Podcast on both Facebook and Instagram. Just Lawful Pod is on Twitter, of course. For everything in the meantime that's Adelaide True Crime, of course, please follow Sean's work with the advertiser at Sean Fuster on both Facebook and Instagram. I just want to thank everyone. Absolutely thank you, Sean, for being involved in this first case. For that, we thank Julie so much, and the support and love from her family and friends. Everyone who has contacted us and left us messages about the coverage we've given this, we couldn't thank you enough. And just as we finish this out, something that Julie said, and I can't stress this enough. We want you to love our work. We don't want you to become our work. So please walk away. Don't get involved in this. Enjoy the work. Don't become our work. And we'll speak to you next time on Just Lawful.